My name is Susan Reed. I'm the education consultant for the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra and also the principal keyboard player. It's time for our 77th season, and wow, do we have quite an array of music to share with Anchorage's audiences. And we cannot wait to play for all of you again, live or live stream. So let's talk a little bit about the upcoming program for opening night, September 24th. Our concert will begin with an overture by Leonard Bernstein from his musical theater operetta piece, Candide. This is one of the biggies in terms of the Bernstein world. Playwright Lillian Hellman had approached Bernstein in 1953 with the idea of adapting Voltaire's 1759 novella, Candide, for the musical theater. Voltaire was a philosopher, a writer, civil liberties advocate, and many other things during the Age of Enlightenment. Candide had a subtitle, All for the Best. This was a young man who had a sheltered existence and was indoctrinated by a professor of his mentor, Professor Pangloss, to believe in optimism. He evolves through painful, slow disillusionment during a series of outrageous disasters in the story. And by the ending, he has then developed his own philosophy: we must cultivate our garden. It was a controversial book that poked satirical fun at religion, government, the military, and many other things, and was banned extensively after publication due to its phony moralism. It has been translated into hundreds and hundreds of languages now, and is one of the most popular classic French novels. A British critic in the early 2020s said that it's probably one of the 100 most influential books ever written. So Lillian Hellman, back to this playwright, who was very important in the American musical theater scene by the 1950s, saw sinister parallels between what was going on with the McCarthy hearings and what had happened in the time of Voltaire's history, looking at the Inquisition and church purges. There was a lot of anti-communist hysteria in the United States, and so there were these hearings before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. A lot of artists and writers were brought forward as potential communists. In 1954, Bernstein began work on Candide, but he was also working on another little piece called West Side Story, which kind of took a lot of his energy. He reworked Candide for many years to come. Ironically, Hellman's written section on politics was cut out of the libretto before the Broadway opening. These were dangerous times for artists and activists. In 1956, Candide premiered on Broadway to mixed reviews, and it closed after only 2 months. It wasn't a traditional musical. There was no romantic plot. There were no songs that did well as covers by other artists, and some critics said it was just too clever for its own good. So it was Bernstein's first flop. He did 6 more rewrites between 1957 and 1971, forever hampered by problems with the lyrics. In 1982, there was a new production mounted by New York City Opera, directed by Hal Prince. There were 34 successful performances, and now Candide surfaces in repertory companies worldwide, loving its brilliant score. The exhilarating overture to Candide has become a popular opener for orchestral concerts and has become one of the most frequently performed contemporary compositions by a composer. This brilliant piece includes melodies from the famous song Glitter and Be Gay, Oh Happy We, and The Best of All Possible Worlds, as well as tunes written specifically for the overture. Candide is a beautiful, fun, irreverent, irresistible romp full of wonderful music, perfect orchestration. And Marin Alsop, the conductor, aptly concluded, the fact that Bernstein never lost his capacity to believe in the inherent goodness of humankind was his gift to the world. From the cleverness and clarity of Candide's overture, through the biting sarcasm of some of the songs that follow, and then to bring us full circle to the unwavering optimism of Make Our Garden Grow, is Bernstein at his absolute best. Composer Mary D. Watkins, in an interview, shared some interesting reflections on her development as a child into adult musician. She said, I started this musical journey in Pueblo, Colorado as a little piano student. I was not quite 4 years old and didn't have any idea why I was being given piano lessons. I don't think I had shown any interest in playing the piano, but it was my mother's bright idea to get me started early. From the very beginning, I was admonished to confine my piano playing to the written notes on the page because it was of great importance to my mother that I be literate in the piano. Playing by ear was forbidden. For that reason, I wasn't interested in piano lessons, but I did as I was told. Not until I dared to cross the forbidden line using my ear did I really become interested in music. When I thought no one was listening, I would play hymns I had heard at church and other songs I liked and heard. And at some point, it didn't take too long. My teacher and my mother knew I was playing by ear as much as I was playing with the music. And since they actually liked what they heard, they didn't bother me anymore about it. I soon took up the violin and later the trumpet, and I played in the school orchestra and band, and in high school, I played the tuba. Music programs in the schools is where I think my interest in music really broadened. I was fascinated by the combinations of instruments playing together, the colors, emotions, and moods it created. It was magical. I also played at the church I grew up in. I was a natural accompanist, so I was always busy playing in community talent shows and things like that. It's been a long road. I worked as an organist in churches. I worked in musical theater, was a music director and resident composer. I, many years later, found myself in Los Angeles transcribing music for R&B, rock, and jazz musicians. My career was focused mostly on performance, playing with my own ensemble, but also touring, and then getting commissions to compose pieces. My first was for the Bay Area Women's Symphony, and then I was approached for a San Francisco-based dance company, this is one of my favorite stories, to write a jazz version of the Nutcracker Ballet, which became known as the Revolutionary Nutcracker Suite. Mary Watkins is an eclectic composer. She has worked in styles ranging from boogie-woogie to country, church hymns, opera, classical music, and incorporating her mission in social justice. She was born in 1939 and is still an active, thriving composer. She said when she was learning to write music, I had to relax and learn to let the music breathe. I needed a large palette for expression, and I jumped at the chance to major in composition when I went to Howard University. I have experienced and felt the weight of racism in my life and seen how it affects my family and my community. I explored the way my people prayed and sang their way through the ugliness of being on a receiving end of institutionalized racism. Art, music, gives the breath of life and spirit of truth to any story and brings us closer to our higher selves. My advice to students is to study and be open to opportunities, to create as few enemies as possible along the way, and support others to achieve their dreams. Never take your eyes off the prize. Risk failure. There will be dark periods, but never give up. The piece 5 Movements in Color was commissioned and premiered in 1994 by the Camellia Symphony in Sacramento, California. I have viewed this work as a statement regarding the African American experience, she said. The Anchorage Symphony will be playing the opening 2 movements of this piece. The first, subtitled Once Upon a Time, features African drums where then strings enter to tell a story that starts peacefully, but then becomes more active and then violent. The second movement is Soul of Remembrance, where a melody floats above a march. It's bittersweet and nostalgic, a song of power and of great hope, enduring hope. Someone who attended a conference on spirituals and church music in the Black church listened to a recording of this movement and said that the spirit of being fully human, especially in the midst of exile, enslavement, and sorrow, is one of the absolute gems of listening to this piece and experiencing it. We are really proud to present some of the music of Mary D. Watkins on our 77th opening night concert. We're really going to have a treat with our guest solo slot on opening night of the September 24th ASO concert, Korngold's ravishing, gorgeous, virtuosic violin concerto. Now, Korngold, an interesting person to study, and for pre-concert purposes, he's one that I'd love to say, you got a little homework here if you're interested in it, because there's some movies you should watch to really catch on to what all the details there are in the Korngold's masterful score. A little bit about his life. He was a child prodigy as a pianist and a composer. His dad was a famous music critic in Vienna, and he invited Gustav Mahler to come and listen to some of his son's pieces as a child. Mahler said, he's a genius. He's like a Mendelssohn or a Mozart. And eventually he will be a creator, not just a recreator, meaning then he wouldn't be performing on the piano his pieces so much as writing for all kinds of genres. He was masterful, richly expressive, astounding instrumentation, full-blooded romanticism in everything he wrote. At the age of 20, Korngold's works were being played by the Vienna Philharmonic. In 1934, he was invited to Hollywood to write film scores, a specific score for Midsummer Night's Dream. Hollywood movies were all the rage in Europe at this time. Hitler enters history here, though, and Korngold said, "We thought of ourselves as Austrian until Hitler made us Jewish." There's extraordinary sophistication and romantic energy in the music from the golden age of Hollywood, the 1930s and the 1940s, due primarily to Korngold's scores. He wrote 23 film scores, and then a few other European refugees during the war. The scores that Korngold created are an extension of his classical focus, and the studio work enriched his symphonic output. Whenever Korngold invited a violinist whose name was Huberman to dinner, the virtuoso invariably asked him, "So, Eric, where is my violin concerto you promised me?" And for about 30 years, he received no response. But finally, in 1945, the composer sat down at the piano and played a soaring lyrical theme. And Huberman said, "That's it, that has to be in my concerto. Promise me that you'll write it." So, in fact, that's what Korngold did. And by 1947, the concerto existed, but sadly, Huberman didn't get to play it. He was unable to fit it into his already busy concert schedule. So the premiere went to the legendary Jascha Heifetz, who actually encouraged Korngold to increase the technical difficulties of the solo part. The premiere took place in St. Louis in 1947, and the reception was triumphant. Korngold wrote, "It was a success just as my best times in Vienna." But unfortunately, the critics in New York were not as kind. Olin Downs panned it as a Hollywood concerto, and there was a general prejudice against film music and Korngold's lush, romantic musical style prevalent in critical circles at that time. It's a favorite of violinists to play the Korngold Overture today, and part of the fame is because when Jascha Heifetz played the premiere, he then several years later made what is the epic recording of the work, 1953, with the LA Philharmonic. So I'm going to give you some movie homework now. We'll talk briefly through each of the movements of the Korngold, and I'm going to give you the background on which of the melodies came from what scores. The first movement is exquisitely lyrical, and the first theme comes from a movie called Another Dawn, which came out in 1937 and won Korngold his first Academy Award. It's a romantic melodrama that features Errol Flynn, and it's a love quadrangle where all four of the main characters are too noble to act on their real feelings. There's a virtuoso violin transition after the first theme, and then a new theme, which comes from the 1939 movie Juarez, is introduced. This was a historical epic the French trying to build an empire in Mexico and failing in 1860. This is operatic. The Carlotta melody for the character in the film was Betty Davis played her part, and Korngold found Betty Davis's acting and speaking very inspiring to his music writing. Maximilian, her lover, breaks news that she cannot have children, and so the music recurs then when the Carlotta character has a mad scene in the film. Here I want to point out there was something stated about this concerto, and I kind of think it relates a bit to this first movement, if not to the whole piece. But Korngold said about Heifetz playing these beautiful melodies and what he did with it classically, orchestrally. It was intended for a Caruso of the violin rather than a Paganini, but Heifetz was both in one person. The second movement of the concerto, luscious and sublime, comes from the Oscar-winning score for Anthony Adverse, which came out in 1936. This is based on a massive 1,200-page novel about an aristocratic love child finding his way in the world. Producer Jack Warner was told, you really need to read the book since we're working on the movie, and Jack Warner's historic response was, read the book? I can't even lift the book. Frederick March and Olivia de Havilland star in the film. Olivia de Havilland plays the childhood sweetheart part to Anthony Adverse, but a lot of things keep them apart. They're reunited and then ripped apart, so that's the basic theme. The music, again, stunning and gorgeous. The final movement is primarily based on melodies from the 1937 movie Prince and the Pauper, based on Mark Twain's fable. And this is the most watchable of all these films today. It's an astonishing array of creative treatments of the music from The Prince and the Pauper in this violin concerto format for the violin soloist and the full orchestra. It's a showcase for our star player, and then the orchestral colors accompany, including wonderful colors by vibraphone, xylophone, celeste, and harp. One of my favorite snide reviews of the premiere of the concerto when it finally occurred was, this is more corn than gold. But nope, historians violently disagree with that now. It's so virtuosic, but so passionately authentic and in the moment, and now is beloved by audiences and by performers. Performers brave enough to embrace all the virtuosic challenges of it. And we know Bella is gonna knock this out of the house. So it's a do not miss. Concluding the Anchorage Symphony season opener on September 24th is a beloved work that the symphony has revisited over the years, and we're happy to bring it to the fore for this salute in so many ways to America's music, Dvorak's New World Symphony. He was the most famous Czech composer internationally. Born in a tiny village, he moved to Prague to study, play the viola in a theater orchestra, and according to him, eat very little. Brahms took an interest in him. He received a Vienna stipend and was introduced to Brahms' publisher. 20 years later, Dvorak was internationally famous. He undertook 8 trips to England, where they adored him there. But his longest trip abroad was the 2.5 years he spent in the United States, starting in 1892. I'd like to just kind of give a few general facts about Dvorak's life before we talk specifically about the symphony. He was the eldest of 9 kids and expected to become a butcher. But at the age of 16, in the little village he was living in, he begged to pursue music. And his father finally agreed that he could move to Prague, where he couldn't afford a piano, so he befriended wealthier students and would practice in their homes. But since he would show up day and night, way late into the night, he couldn't usually play in one home for very long and was constantly having to make new friends. He was dead broke, had tried to write the classic Czech opera. That was a failure. But his first real success was inspired by Czech poetry, a piece for orchestra. Flush with cash for the first time in his life, he married his childhood sweetheart, Anna, who was the sister of his first love, compare this historically to people like Mozart and Haydn, who also married sisters of the women they loved. But in this case, this was a meant to be happy thing, and their marriage was strong and vital for many, many years. Unfortunately, they had a baby who died quite suddenly. Then their 11-month-old daughter died from being poisoned accidentally. And then their 3-year-old son died of chicken pox. So they were childless and grieving. And so Dvorak poured out his heart into writing a very, very important choral work called the Stabat Mater, putting out his anguish and providing solace in music. The Dvorak family then was able to expand, have more children. They had 6 kids, a simple home life, a noisy home life with children running around. And Dvorak himself loved pigeons and trains and ships, hiking and gardening. He wasn't into the urban life. He was definitely a country man and loved simplicity. So now let's talk about what happened to get him to America. Jeanette Thurber was putting together a conservatory, and she wanted a big name composer to come and head it in New York City, but also she wanted to try to encourage composers in America to write American music. So her first big hire was Dvorak, and he reluctantly took the job, but he was going to make 25 times his usual salary, and he decided to give it a chance. So he came to New York, and this symphony was the first of a series of masterpieces written in America, which included a cello concerto, a string quartet, and a string quintet. Spirituals, particularly because of the influence of a student at the conservatory who became famous in his own right, Harry Burleigh, and then his exposure to Native American music had an influence. Thurber herself provided Dvorak with American poems like Longfellow's Hiawatha and its other materials, and even took him to see Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He began this symphony 4 months after his arrival, and he says, "I took pleasure in it, and it will differ considerably from my other symphonies. The influence in America must be felt by everyone who has a nose at all." It made its Carnegie Hall debut in 1893, and Dvorak wrote, "The newspapers are saying that no composer has ever had such a triumph. I do know I would never have written it if I had never been in America." The movements, the first, the Germanic feature is the recycling of themes between the movements. So that comes from European influence. And then there's a parade of these themes in the finale of the symphony. The poignant second theme, which features the flute, resembles the spiritual "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." The second movement is the most famous of the piece, the Largo, with its incredibly gorgeous English horn solo, which sounds like it's its own spiritual, but it basically has become one. It's just an original theme. But in the 1920s, someone came up with the idea of writing words. And so now that theme is known as "Goin' Home." And the words, the lyrics sung to the melody are these: "Goin' home, I'm goin' home. Quiet like, some still day, I'm goin' home. It's not far, just close by, through an open door. Work all done, care laid by, gonna fear no more. Mother's there, 'spectin' me, father's waitin' too. Lots of folks gathered there, all the friends I knew." The third movement, the Vivace Scherzo, is fierce and balanced with a relaxed folk episode in the middle section. It portrays the feast and the dancing of Longfellow's poem Hiawatha, suggested by that scene. And the finale is a grand conclusion where you can maybe abide by thinking there are influences of Brahms and early Wagner if you're a real classical buff. That doesn't matter. The music just speaks to the heart, regardless of what you know about classical music history. It's thrilling and exciting, and you also have a strong influence of Czech folk songs. And it's a barn burner at the ending. This whole concert, our opening night of Your Anchorage Symphony, September 24th, is a do not miss. Please join us. It will make your heart soul with joy and the positivity and the excitement of players who are loving to play every note of every piece. So Bernstein, Watkins, Korngold, and Dvorak are waiting for you, Anchorage, 7:30 p.m., September 24th, and hope to see you there.